Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Proudly Jewish Conversations on Israel and Jewish Identity. I am Cantor Eyal Bitton, and I started this podcast, as many of you know, right after, just a few weeks after October 7th. And I felt that there was a real need among members of my congregation, and then later beyond, who wanted to grapple with these issues. We grapple with our relationship to Israel, our relationships to ourselves. Who are we as Jews in this context? What do we do about the rising anti-Semitism? And one of these areas is with our youth, with the schools, with the public school system. And I really am happy to welcome today our guest, Jany Finkielsztein, who is she's a senior education analyst at the Cantor Education Institute. And now, Jany, welcome. I know Camera.
Thank you, Eyal.
And I know Camera, or I knew Camera as this organization that was a little bit like honest reporting, in the sense that they would expose media mistakes, you know, to be kind, or perhaps biases, and point them out and try to correct them. But you're with this education section, and how long has this? Was it from the outset that Camera had this division, or did it develop a little later?
So Camera was founded in 1982, and Camera stands Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis, and really started 40 years ago as a media monitor, research, and membership organization devoted to promoting accurate and balanced coverage of Israel and the Middle East, its history, current events, and Zionism, really fostering rigorous reporting while educating news consumers about the role of the media in the presentation of factual information, and really holding the media accountable in those efforts. The focus on educational material really started more than 2 decades ago, with reports on higher ed, professors and their activities, their publications, and what they were, promoting through their teachings and their activism, support for BDS on campus, as well as what was happening in K-12. There were already reports coming out of Camera and people very involved in education. Is really as a think tank. There's also a campus team that really supports and monitors what students on college campuses are being exposed, and sort of helps them be empowered and trains them to respond to what's happening. And so formally, now that there were all these elements in education, the Cantor Education Institute started in 2021, really focused in all these areas, the campus work, the higher ed research on what professors were, producing and promoting through their quote unquote, research activities and scholarship, and then also K-12. So that's how I came in. I was a public school educator for many years in Massachusetts, and I started consulting once I knew that they were also focused and officially in K-12.
And we've been hearing, especially lately, about a great deal of problems at the higher education levels, universities, right? This is all over the news. Certainly in Jewish circles, it's a contagion. It's a problem. It's parents that are that are scared for their kids, that are pulling their kids out. Parents, as kids are going into universities, they're considering where do we send our kids. But you're working with K through 12. What's the atmosphere like for Jewish kids in that range? Can you speak to that a bit and let us know?
Yeah, so in the K-12, there are areas or pockets in the country where there's sort of infiltration of propaganda against Israel, Zionism, and also falsehoods about the history and the connection of Jews to the land of Israel have been propagandized for many, many years. There's like a strident ideological agenda inculcating children with the belief that the world is divided into oppressed and oppressors, that white people are oppressors, and people of color and other non-traditional groupings comprise the oppressed, and Jews are excluded from the later group and instead are increasingly portrayed also as archetype of oppressors. And the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is processed through this lens of racism and equated to civil rights struggles and apartheid. There's no alternate viewpoints. And so the binary grouping of colonizers and indigenous people easily fits the portrayal of Israelis and Palestinians. And so Jewish kids are exposed in schools to being in classrooms where teachers may be presenting this sort of dichotomy applied to the Israeli-Palestinian issues, especially prominently after October 7, because it was widely known that things were happening in the Middle East. And for lack of a better word, there were a lot of uninformed teachers that had been, indoctrinated with not a lot of historical knowledge and facts about the Middle East on what Israel was and how it came into being a state within the Middle East and what was happening, what has been evolving with the conflict with the Arabs and more particularly with Hamas.
Right. In terms of the fundamental ignorance about Israel's founding and what it is, on one hand, I feel like, how could they not know? How could you not understand what Israel is? It's not like it's a country that has no connection to the United States. Israel has been the Americans' strongest ally in the Middle East for years, and so it's not like it's some small country somewhere else where we barely have any relations with. It's not that. So, and there are Jews that have been culturally involved in integrated in the American fabric of society for years. How do you not know? So my question is, where does this ignorance come from? Is it true ignorance on the educator side, or did the Jewish community fail to educate these educators?
Well, I mean, these educators are trained in schools of education, and schools of education, are promoting this binary ideology for many, many years.
Right.
One of the landmark textbooks is Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, a radical Brazilian activist that really thought that schools should be houses to promote social justice and changes in society and activism in students, and sort of had shifted the role of the teacher from knowledge-based, factual knowledge to promote informed debate to activists. And so teachers are not anymore checking their activism at the door. And so some of that is the change in the role of the teacher. And another part is what is required of teachers in order for them to be in front of students and what kind of knowledge they have about global history, about world history, about the history of the Jews.
Now, my daughter is almost 8 years old. She's in second grade. Very proud Jew. She's almost 8 years old. So she's not, the following situation is not the case with her, but if she were in an environment where she's exposed to a teacher who is promoting this ideology or repeating some of these falsehoods, how is a child like my 7 to 8 year old daughter supposed to handle that? How are they equipped to do it? You see what I'm getting at? It's these are children who sort of accept the information that they're given by the authorities, and if they disagree, there's a power dynamic, right? Can you speak to that? Like how vulnerable are our children?
Well, it's all children. I think the danger is not only Jewish children to be exposed to this and really view the country that is so ingrained in the identity of being Jewish, the state of Israel, our homeland, the Jewish homeland that is intricate part of all of our identity as Jews for most American Jews. It's put sort of on the test and presented in a negative way to Jewish children, but it's also promoting non-Jewish children to really grow up with this negative ideology about the state of Israel and falsehood. So it's binary, because it wouldn't only be coming from the teacher for your daughter, it would also be coming from their peers now that they had been exposed to this propaganda. And so it could become also a social pressure for her to sort of distance herself from Israel, especially given the binary being presented in schools of oppressed oppressors. Jews don't land in that.
Yeah.
She wouldn't want to be an oppressor. It's presented as a negative thing. And so I would say that some Jewish kids might even react by not identifying. One way to really counter that for Jewish children is for parents to really make sure that they promote a very strong connection to their own Jewish identity, with a lot of knowledge and understanding about what Israel means in our lives, and whether it's, Hebrew school, whether it's going to Israel, whether it's reading books about Israel, whether it's understanding the history of Israel, the history of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And so I think that parents, just like so many parents are involved with the math education or literacy and making sure that their kids are reading and writing, this kind of creates another lens that parents need to make sure that they're really actively empowering their own Jewish children to be able to understand that these are not truths, that these are lies, what are being promoted in their schools.
Would you say that the Jewish community has not done this enough so far, like that at a societal level? And if not, why? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I'm an immigrant to this country, and so, because we were a minority in a Catholic country in Colombia, and being our Jewish identity was really singled out for us, but also the others also singled it out for us. And so there wasn't a lot of mixture. And so it was very strong. It was who we were. And I think that many Americans had not been exposed to the prejudice, the strong prejudice that many of us, perhaps in Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, or in other countries like Latin America, have been exposed. And so, you sort of become very complacent, and you don't become guarded into what could happen as a Jew in America. And you really firmly believe that you're American first, your kids are American first. And so the melting in the pot is the most important idea. And so the Jewish identity, sometimes through Hebrew schools, is more learning Hebrew and doing bar mitzvahs and, learning the religion and maybe cooking and celebrating the holidays. But it is lost, perhaps, the need for that strong knowledge and connection to the land of Israel and why it's there.
Right. And I would add that sense of peoplehood that connects us all, whether you are in Bogota or in, I don't know, Paris,
or South Africa.
Yeah. Now, speaking of Africa, I grew up till I was 8. I grew up in Kinshasa, in the former, it was called Zaire at the time, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I did not experience anti-Semitism at that age. There was a neighbor where there was an incident. His father was the head of the PLO in Kinshasa. There was a little bit of something, but generally not. But being this minority, being a member of this small group that was diverse, because we came from Israel, from Canada, from Italy, from South Africa, from the States, from these various countries, and we were of different colors, if you will. And as a child, when you grew up in that, you understand Jewish identity to be more than one thing, and there's something that ties us all beyond faith, because there was no kosher food, there was no synagogue. Religion per se was not the binding contract between us. So the anti-Semitism doesn't always have to be the thing that bonds you, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, that's true. Anti-Semitism doesn't have to be what bonds you. But the sense of identity, it almost is brought up much more strongly if you want to thrive and live in a society in which you're such a minority and you're so different, like in other countries.
Yes, that's well said.
In
Yes.
America, sort of, you go into a house and you meet people and you don't know if they're Jewish or not Jewish, the last names, but in other countries, it is just so obvious that we're Jewish. You really couldn't hide your identity. You really know you were the other, you were the different one.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge factor in what we're seeing today. I think American Jews have no history to understand what they're seeing today. It's sort of like a deer in headlights. What has happened? What is happening? How? Because we thought we were in the States so accepted, such a part of society. What's going on? They don't have that sense of culture of being guarded that you speak of. Let's return for a moment to what you do with Camera and the K through 12 education system. Where are we seeing this type of ideology entering K through 12? Is it all across the states? Is it in certain areas a little more than other areas?
It's in certain areas more than other areas that are more primed to this binary ideology, for sure. But it could happen anywhere, including in red states, because it's about the determination of the teachers and educators to sort of subversively infiltrate, even if it's not the official curriculum or even the standards for the state, the learning standards that, set by the Department of Education of that state. There is an effort to subversively infiltrate this in a way to promote the propaganda. So, for example, there are states or local districts that have a mandate for teaching Holocaust education. And so there's stories of, teachers, for example, showing a documentary of the Holocaust and turning around and saying, well, actually, this is exactly what Israel is doing to Gaza. It's really that simple, just with a simple statement, or, showing maps or historical maps that are inaccurate, or saying that Jerusalem was the capital of Palestine or the current capital of Palestine, not really indicated that Palestine was not really a country, that it's really a region, and the history of where that term comes from is just not even placed. Of course, it's much easier to infiltrate in some quote unquote identified blue states. So definitely we see it, Washington State, California, Minnesota, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
However, there's even places in Texas, and we even have somebody from Florida that reached out, and in some of these teacher trainings, we have information. There are teachers from all across North Carolina, Texas, Florida, from all across the spectrum that are, completely aligned with infiltrating, and they feel that it's actually an important social justice endeavor for them to bring this to the classroom for kids.
It's frightening to me because I feel daunted. It's right. You're a spit in the ocean. There's a whole ocean that's working in one direction. My metaphors are not good here, but the idea that we're such a small number against such a big wave. I think I'm going to come back to the idea to where we are and what our prospects are maybe a little later in our conversation. I was at a conference several months ago that was hosted by Stand With Us, and it was their clergy department. And at one point we talked. They gave a presentation on K through 12, and they spoke about the particular field of study in K through 12 called ethnic studies, and then the subdivision called Liberated Ethnic Studies. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about what this is, and perhaps how anti-Semitic or anti-Israel ideology is being promulgated through this field?
Yes, so sure. So ethnic studies really started in California, and we have reports in the Camera Education website that we've done on the Liberated Ethnic Studies and its inception. Part of the work we do is to research and expose people, organizations, and ideologies involved in this in K-12. And we can talk also about the resources and about what people can do. But ethnic studies started as a requirement for graduation for California students. They said that it was dependent on funding, which still hasn't been approved. So officially, it's still not in its place. But schools started to move to, start to train their teachers on ethnic studies. The problem is that at the beginning, some of these activists infiltrated the committee to design the curriculum. Some of them were professors, some of them were activists, educator activists, and they really embedded BDS and anti-Zionism into the model curriculum. The governor intervened and they said they were going to put guardrails and this was not going to happen. And so these activists sort of bonded together and formed a coalition called the Liberated Ethnic Studies Coalition that started to build more and more momentum across the nation, and more organizations formed this coalition to really push back against the fact that they were not going to be infiltrating anti-Zionist, anti-Israel ideology into ethnic studies. And so the coalition now comprises many national organizations like Black Lives Matter School, or even local organizations like Teaching Well Muslim, that it's mostly active in New Jersey and New York, but also the Abolitionist Teaching Network, that's in Georgia, Xito, that's active in Arizona, and Washington Ethnic Studies Now, it's active in Washington. So it's really comprised a whole effort. And there's also ideologically, Muslim extremist organizations that have been behind this since the very beginning. The Arab Resource and Organizing Center from California, Teach Palestine out of Mecca, that infiltrated and became also primary drivers of this liberated coalition. And organizations that actually provide curriculum resources like Zin Education Project for schools. And so the coalition really, they support each other in this ideology. They host webinars and teacher workshops. They promote for them to be consultants for school districts. So public funding is actually giving money to these organizations. Millions of dollars could be giving money to these organizations because they've infiltrated the system to be hired by public schools in order to do that, or even by the state to be part of the committees to design ethnic studies standards.
Okay. Thank you so much for that.
But the thing to understand is that they call themselves Liberated Ethnic Studies Coalition, but the name is a hoax because it's really any organization that is really promoting this Marxist jihadist ideology combined with anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel propaganda. It's sort of a meeting of the minds.
I understand. Now, a lot of my viewers are on the same page as me and you when you say anti-Zionism. For those people who are less informed or unclear on this, can you explain what you mean when you say anti-Zionism? What is this ideology that they're trying to promote?
They're really presenting Zionism as a racist movement, as a racist political movement to exterminate and create the genocide and take the Palestinians out of their homes, instead of really giving Zionism what it was for, which was really the movement for Jewish self-determination in their native homeland. So it is amazing how every other group has a right for their self-determination, and there's also this celebration of people that are indigenous to the land. Instead, Jews don't. And so it's denying the Jews the right to self-determination, and therefore, this movement of anti-Zionism, meaning presenting Zionism in a very negative, false way with this dichotomy, what they're doing is really promoting anti-Semitism, and they're hiding behind their thin-veiled anti-Semitism, saying, well, we don't have a problem with the Jews, it's just with the Zionists. Right. We don't have a problem with the Jewish religion, it's just the people that actually are, loyal to the state of Israel and they're Zionists. And with that, they actually hijack something like the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, saying, well, it really infringes on free speech because it's saying that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. And that's not what the IHRA is saying. Right. It's saying demonizing the state of Israel and
Right.
denying the right to its existence is what it's anti-Semitism. So they really hijack the language, they hijack the definitions. I was talking to a parent, and he said, it's incredible how anti-Semitism is one of the only it is the only kind of way of bigotry where you can redefine it in order to fit whatever you don't want it to include.
Wow. That's an
Right?
interesting
Like, oh,
observation. Yeah.
no, that's not anti-Semitism. And it's really the people that are not even Jewish defining it.
That right, and that's one of the really scary parts is Jews need to any group needs to be able to define who they are. And when we say Israel is an essential part of for those of us who say, and so much of the Jewish community do, Israel is an essential part of our Jewish identity. To have someone who's not Jewish go, no, it's not. You're wrong. Is absurd, if not offensive, and if not worse than that. Now,
So let's go back
ahead.
to your daughter being in class as an
Yeah.
8-year-old and a
Yes.
teacher presenting this kind of ideas about Zionism.
Yeah.
And yet, she's grown in a home where she's grown to love the state of Israel and to be a Zionist and to go and have a connection to the land. Then what is the end result for Jewish kids? And
Yeah.
more so for the Jewish kids that don't have a strong sense of who they are in their Jewish identity.
Right, and we're seeing more and more of that. I know I am. I'm a cantor in a congregation. People, their children, their nephews, nieces, what have you. I'm hearing more and more and seeing more and more of this. Where, for some students, it only empowers them to go, "Oh, this is who I am. I will embrace this entirety of my Judaism." And for others, it's this distancing and rejection, casting off of that, and that's the real danger of the external world redefining what a Jew is.
Well, the only thing that I want to add here is also that in this dichotomy of trying to, portray and divide the world into oppressed and oppressors, and oppressors being the ones that have the right to speak because they've been wronged, there's also the portraying of Israel as an outgrowth of Western colonialism.
Yeah.
And the most visible reminder of the sin of colonialism, and really, accusing Israel of acting with impunity, of committing crimes to suppress Palestinian aspirations and taking land the same way that in America, the colonizers took the land of the Native Americans. And so making a lot of those sort of artificial connections between the oppressed populations in this country.
Yeah.
It's been very cleverly portrayed.
Yeah, I agree, and it's hard, if not impossible, to undo. You spoke about regarding anti-Zionism. Just one more point. I read an article that you co-wrote, I believe, in January 2023, in Allgemeiner, that well before October 7th, where you spoke about how this Liberated Ethnic Studies engages in the erasure of Israel. I mean, it's beyond. We don't know that we disagree. We don't like. It's a complete erasure, which is awful. And ironically, is a call, not a call to genocide. It's a position that is tantamount to, or yields, or leads to a movement of genocide against the Jewish people. If you have no right to be there, if you shouldn't have been there to begin with, and the only rectification is your removal, that's a call to. Seems to me it's a call to genocide.
Well, I mean, the negative portrayals of Jews were brought into the curriculum as part of the shift away from Western history and literature. So the bias against Jews and Israel was bolstered by changes in how history was taught. So emotional narrative replaced the teaching of authenticated facts, of factual knowledge. Howard Zinn's history exemplified this shift. And with that shift, it just opened the door for this. And the penetration of Palestinians and pro-Palestinian activists into every corner of American education. We were sort of asleep at the wheel while they were already doing all these inner workings as teachers, curriculum developers, union activists, professors, deans. And so they brought in their animosity toward Israel and Jews increasingly into the open. By the time October 7 came along, all the masks came off, and really the people that were already showing their faces, like Liberated Ethnic Studies, went on steroids.
Yeah.
Their activity just increased. We, doing this research, were not so surprised, but we were taken aback by the swarm of just their boldness in what they were even already posting by October 7th. Before Israel, even as Jews were slaughtered, babies, the elderly and the kidnappings and the rapes, these people were already posting all these anti-Semitic, anti-Israel radical things online. And so they were very open about it. And they were, the social justice really gave a lot of these activists the umbrella. Right? Oh, we're really about social justice and equality for everybody. And so it fits into the angry demands for retribution, like the other groups. And Jews, because of their success, and because of being perceived as overrepresented in so many fields with success, they were excluded from all this social justice.
To jump to, well, you mentioned so many things I want to talk about, but I will focus for a moment on the idea that we were taken aback. You didn't phrase it in this way, but the idea we didn't handle it right in a way. And earlier you mentioned the IRA definition of anti-Semitism and the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, I think it is. And
yes, correct.
So I want to speak about Jewish education or perhaps I should just say education of Jewishness. For the longest time, conventional wisdom has been that if we educate the Jews, but also the non-Jewish world about the Holocaust, if we inform them, we teach them about this, it will prevent not just another Holocaust, but also prevent the rise of an anti-Semitism, and understand how the slightest bit of anti-Semitism can turn it into something greater. And it looks like this idea has failed. It doesn't seem, the reality today looks like that theory was not correct. Is it that we were not correct as a community, or is it that the outer power of this oppression, this oppressed and oppressor narrative was too strong for it? Why did it?
It's both. It's both. So this, the Jewish success is explained away as derived from white privilege, pursuit of narrow self-interest, Jewish contributions to America and the world are really rendered invisible, and sympathetic portrayals of Jews are really reduced to the units of Holocaust, dead Jews. Dara Horn has done an incredible article of her research, besides her book, also the research in the Atlantic of, the problematic issues with different ways that Holocaust education was taking place. And the issue is that in many mandates and in many schools, Holocaust education is really just reduced as one more genocide. And then without the context of the history of anti-Semitism, without the historical context of World War II and what the world was, what was happening in Germany, and therefore is presented as innocuously. It presented in an innocuous way without the context of what was happening. And so Jews are either oppressors or they're victims. And the aspirational stories of Jews as individuals successfully adapting to, the challenges that they have faced in society or in America disappear in this Marxist oppressor dichotomy. And what kids learn about Jews is that they were murdered. It's almost as if you reduced all the history of African Americans only in slavery. Right. And that's all that kids learn. So there's no other context for non-Jewish kids or for Jewish kids in public schools or independent schools to learn about who the Jewish people are. Yeah. What is it that make them a people? What is it that make them to have survived and thrived in spite of all these challenges that they have faced throughout history? They have been the most oppressed throughout history in all these years. And yet, what kids are learning in school is just being, murdered. And, we've heard accounts even that after all this, these lessons on Holocaust embedded within genocide, some kids in schools have turned around and said, well, Jews must have done something really bad to have that happen
Wow.
to them, to have that done to them.
Wow.
And so it's not, yeah. I mean, we've done now years and years of having as a response Holocaust education.
Yeah.
Has it really reduced anti-Semitism coming into the schools or out of the schools? Do we have less marching students on college campuses as a result of all those Holocaust education? Is that what we need to be sort of advocating for schools to be teaching and for us, for our children to be learning as Jews? I think that's a question that we need to really evaluate. Is the data out there to show that it had actually had an impact on anti-Semitism?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. And there's another thing that's raised. I know I'm ethnically Moroccan. My father had to leave Marrakesh
Exactly.
and in the 50s and look at the entire
Wow.
Jewish population of the Jewish population of the entire Muslim world and certainly the Arab world was basically ethnically cleansed, right? In the 50s through the 70s and what have you.
Yeah.
And this is a story of, again, you talk about being the most oppressed people in history, and like even we're not in Europe. Just Europe and European Jewry can take that prize by itself, and then you throw in this group that I'm talking about that I'm a part of, and I'm sure that they're not teaching that at all. When the focus of Jewish history is just the Holocaust, which is not a just, by the way, for clarification to anyone watching this, you're
No.
missing so much. And I think my question to you, though, and I alluded, I focused on education of Jews in the general school system, but do you think we're doing a good enough job or not a good enough job teaching our own youth in the Jewish school system? And I know that's it's a wide umbrella, but perhaps generally speaking.
You mean in the Jewish day school system, or
Jewish,
you mean in Hebrew school?
I'm saying broadly speaking. I'm broadly speaking. Our Jewish youth that have any sort of Jewish education, whether it's the Jewish day schools or our Sunday schools, and I know there's a rainbow there. It's not just one thing. But if you had to paint with one brush, what would you say?
Well, I would say that we haven't done enough. I would say that we need to affirm even more what makes our identity unique and what bonds us as a people and what connects us to our homeland,
Right.
and what have been important aspects of our identity that have always helped us to rise to all these challenges that we have faced. Because part of the problem with this ideology of oppressors is that we don't fit the narrative. We have been oppressed and persecuted, and yet we have thrived without society owning us anything.
Right.
It's when my grandparents came to Colombia and my parents were first generation, they didn't raise us to say, oh, they owe us something and look what they did and everybody hates us. They raised us to say, okay, now go seek an education and get better.
Yep.
And so what about the pride in who we are and our contributions to the world? I think in this melting pot and in us sort of with this social justice, so many of us, in this country have sort of absorbed and embraced this social justice, tikkun olam, let's bond, let's make this a better world, let's make things right. We forgot our own pride in who we are. It's not just about social justice. It's very important, and tikkun olam is very important. But what makes us unique, and why should we ensure that our children, our Jewish children, are so proud of who we are as a people? Without diminishing anybody else's identity, we can still foster that. And I think that's what it's missing.
Yes.
And not just about Hanukkah, and not just about Purim in the temple, and not just about doing bar mitzvahs and and weddings and all of that, but really what has been the contributions to the world in medicine, in the arts, in music, in theater, in literature, philosophy, economics, science, engineering. What have been the Jewish contribution to the world in spite of everything that we have faced throughout the centuries?
So in terms of what we're facing today, this it feels like a tsunami. It feels like no matter what we do, tide is coming against us. and maybe 2 weeks or a week or so after October 7th, there was a rally here in Portland, Oregon. And I spoke, everyone was negative, and I was too, but I spoke to the people that were there, and I said, one of the things I pointed out was that although it's not black and white, it's not the 1930s right now. And unlike many times in Jewish history, when, our safety, our existence was in peril because we no longer had the protection of the world, the society around us in the diaspora. We may have a lot of negative things happening right now, but we have allies in the non-Jewish world in positions of government, in higher authority positions that, as I said, that are allies, that are willing to go to bat for us and are interested in us, which is not this is an aberration in history. Generally, we would be abandoned, period. I think there are forces that are not with us and some that are. And this leads me to a congressional hearing that just took place yesterday. Today is May 9th. We're talking May 9th. I'll be publishing this podcast not today, but just for those who want to know when this is happening. This is May 9th, and yesterday, May 8th, there was a congressional hearing on anti-Semitism, K-12. And this is not just a Jewish thing, this is Congress. Can you tell us a little bit about what the purpose was and if this gives us hope?
Yeah, I mean, it gives us hope that it was brought on the lens that this is something important that, the federal government is watching and that has noticed, that they have evidence and they have witnesses from students to parents and teachers that spoke to them about their experiences in the public schools and how the public schools have failed to respond in an effective manner to really curtail this, and how if it was any other group, perhaps they would have really had more effective ways to curtail this, whether it's the lies infiltrated in classrooms, whether it's student to student behavior, whether it's teachers and their, ideology in schools, whether it's graffiti, all these kinds of genocidal chants happening in high school walkouts. If it was any other group, if it was the KKK chants that they were using, they wouldn't have said, I'm not sure that they would have said it's free speech. And I think that we see the federal government really noticing that, that they need to bring this to light, and that they need to bring the leaders of these public schools to some accountability for the general public about what has not been done and the ineffective ways that they have dealt with this, and the lack of seriousness with policy, code of conduct, and consequences on students and staff. So yeah, this was extremely important, and in a way, in talking to some of these officials, I think the idea is also that it hopefully will worry some of these districts that haven't addressed this. The federal government has a lot more impact on the college and universities than the way the public school system is more like a local level, and the states that really determine the standards, the professional standards for teaching licensure and for supervision. But the federal government bringing this in light, it can also deter other districts from ignoring this and sort of sweeping it under the rug and make them worry, make them kind of feel tentative and scared of not addressing this.
Yeah, that's very, very, I was going to say positive and encouraging, but I don't mean that. I mean that there's a positive dividend to this, and people being on note and going there. They're accountable and they're being watched, and hopefully they'll be on the right side of not just history, but the right side of morality. I watched some of the hearing. There were three superintendents from three different schools that were speaking, and one's answer to a question had me a little bit worried, but didn't surprise me. The question that was posed to the three was, is the term "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" anti-Semitic? And I think they all said yes, ultimately. One, perhaps two, qualified their yeses. And one of them in particular, said, well, I'm quoting here, "It is if it is calling for the elimination of the Jewish people in Israel." And and added that the term can mean different things to different people. And I think that lack, I see in that a lack of clarity and understanding, actually, of that's the whole point. That's why it's anti-Semitic, right? So I don't know. When I hear that answer, I don't know if I should be encouraged or worried that even with this congressional hearing, they're going to really get it. What do you think?
I think the issue is that administrators have either been sort of supportive of this, underneath supportive of this, or they have been complacent because they're not very knowledgeable on the history of the land and the history of the Jewish people and the history of what has gone on with the Arab-Israeli conflict and the wars, etc., and or with the current situation because of the bias in media reporting, which Camera addresses that as well, and so they sort of don't know what to do, and so they wanna, being a leader in a post is also being a politician, right? I mean, you're hired, you're not elected, although one of the leaders I was called was the board president for the school board because the superintendents have shifted from Montgomery County, wasn't the superintendent, was the school board president, the chair of the school board.
Okay.
But it's really a political job too. And so in their eyes, they have to sort of, be careful with also not upsetting, other constituents that they have in their schools. And so I think I have a feeling that, like the college presidents, they're not standing on the right side of history, but they're trying to play a political game in saying that, and they're not very knowledgeable about the history. It's both.
Can you tell me a little bit about the impact that Camera has or has had on the education system? I know with the media side, that they've made countless corrections they've noted them and made various media outlets make these corrections. They've had some influence in policies here and there. Now with the education department, how do you gauge success and what do you do with these K through 12 curriculum and what have you? And
we adhere to Camera's principles, promoting factual accuracy and a deep well of information about that we draw upon to call important history that adheres, that really combats the Palestinian anti-Israel narrative that they omit intentionally. And so we call out and we report on and we monitor and research curricular material and resources that really omits factual information about, Jews and about Israel, about Zionism. And the reports have been used, like the Liberated Ethnic Studies, for example, with legislatures and with people involved in education, whether it's at the local level, if they're thinking of hiring a consultant that is involved in Liberated Ethnic Studies or that is involved in this sort of activism that we have reported on, then they have used our reports in order to do that. The other area is that we also have a literature project where we also expose the barrage of anti-Israel K-12 literature that is sort of promoting this connection to these oppressed protagonists, in children's literature that are, infiltrated into schools. And so we actually have reports on what is bias and what are falsehoods in these narratives, whether they're fiction or nonfiction. And so, for example, our report has been used in a district where one of those books was required reading, and it was now kind of taken from the required reading for English language arts and replaced by something else because the report was used as evidence. So our reports are research-based and factually based, and they're not just complaints. They're based on factual information, and that's what Cameras is known for. And so those reports have been used. The reports about these organizations have been used. If schools are distributing the resources, we have a recent report on the Choices program, which is a high school curriculum produced by Brown University, and all the bias in their curriculum about the state of Israel and the history of Israel. And so we have a district whose parents presented that to their district in order for them to kind of shift and not use that curriculum as their history curriculum and social studies as the high school. So the impact is really exposing and researching, whether it's books or social studies and organizations involved. And then the other area that we also do is we sort of research materials that teachers can use. So for example, we have a literature project where we have researched and curated a list of books for K-12 for books, nonfiction and fiction about Israel, Israelis, and the history of the land and Zionism, so that kids in schools can actually have access to factually accurate information and literature from kindergarten to 12th grade, and we recommend it in our website. We have a few districts that now have a few of the books for their summer reading list, that have purchased some of those books for middle school classrooms for kids to have access, or for their libraries. And we hope it's going to continue to grow. And we have also a curriculum built in sort of modules called the History of the Jews in the Land. And what that curriculum does is it allows the versatile be used by teachers to embed it in the time of history that they're covering. I mean, it's hard for us to expect a public school, independent school teacher to just take a week to teach about the history of the Jews or the history of Israel. However, during different times of historical accounts, whatever content that grade is covering, we have ready-to-go lessons and resources that they can use to embed what was happening in the land during that time, where were the Jews, and what was happening with the Jews before, after the destruction of the Second Temple. And so we present at teacher conferences, and we also give workshops to parents to help them also address what it is that they're facing in schools. And so we have many different aspects of our team. What makes difference in our team is that we're comprised of educators.
Right.
And so many in our team are educators that have worked within schools, that understand the structure, the hierarchy, how schools, make choices about curriculum, how they do professional development, where teachers get their resources. And so we understand the inner workings of schools. The other thing is that we have experts, just like the same experts that are providing the media knowledge. We have experts and scholars that this is their expertise to really help guide the kind of scholarly production of resources that we have available for schools. And because we're educators, we're also able to provide training and be strategic thinking partners for parents that are facing this in the schools.
I'll place a link to the website. If you go
to the main landing page and you scroll down, you see our latest reports. But also there's a K-12 section, there's the higher ed, there's also the campus, and there's, different resources that we have produced. So, for example, right after October 7, I'm sure that public schools just, released all of these resources that people could use in order to address having conversations about the conflict. Well, some of these resources were quite biased, and we knew about them. So we produced a chart where we actually showed how, for example, the Sin Education Project or Rethinking Schools immediately started posting, BDS and all of the oppression in their social media, and a few key points of why they're biased, in order for people and parents to present this and to have the officials at the district to take down and take back those resources.
What does it mean to be successful? And what I mean by that is, are we ever going to get anti-Semitism out of the schools?
That is a great question. And I'm going to answer with this. The anti-Semitism and anti-Israel propaganda coming into schools is a porous membrane. In other words, you address something and you put a stop to it, but yet there's a finding in another area where it can be infiltrated. When these teachers are even hijacking Holocaust education in order to shift it, we've seen ELA lessons where they put the poems of, Theresienstadt with the Butterfly Project next to a poem from a child from Gaza, and the kids are comparing the two poems. And so in the professional development, the teacher is asked by these other teachers from public school, so do you say that Israel is an oppressor? And the teacher says, I don't have to, because we do this lesson right after reading Anne Frank. And so the kids just start asking, wait, who's oppressing this child from Gaza?
Yeah.
And so this is a very important question. And I sure hope so. I think there's so many of us and so many organizations, so many parents aware, so many Jewish teachers aware. I'm in Massachusetts, and there's a huge, important formed group of Massachusetts teachers that are really pushing back on the Massachusetts anti-Semitic, efforts and anti-Israel efforts within the Massachusetts Teacher Union. I think that it will take all of us as a people to be committed to fighting this, and really to be committed to identifying and to clearly, explicitly call it from where it's coming from. Because one of the things that we also see is that we still have Jewish organizations and Jewish leaders and Jewish communal members saying, well, it's the anti-Semitism from the right, and it's the swastikas. Well, we need to recognize where it's coming from in order to address it. That's what it's going to take. And also, the other thing that I think I've talked about in this conversation is we need to go back to rigorous academic, knowledge-based education, and go back to that and move away from this social justice Marxist ideology that has infiltrated the schools, because if that is in place, it still provides that sort of hideout and umbrella for this anti-Semitism to hide under.
So crystal ball, this will be the last question, I think. My daughter is almost 8. And in 10 years, she'll be in her final year of high school. Will things be better or worse than they are today?
I don't think they can get worse than today.
Okay.
So, I think we've reached our bottom.
Right.
So I think it's going to be better, because I think people are so aware and there's so many efforts. I think things are going to be better for your daughter, for my grandchildren.
Amen to that. I'm a Cantor, so I like music, and I don't remember the exact quote, but there's a song by the Beatles where it says, I have to admit things are getting better, and the other line is, they couldn't get much worse. So I think that's what you just captured here. Jany Finkielsztein from Camera.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today for this important and really enlightening conversation. I appreciate it very much.
Well, Eyal, thank you for the opportunity, and I really appreciate the time and the conversation.